Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 20th of November of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And currently we can say that the situation is critical. The situation is critical in the relations between Russian Federation, Ukraine and the NATO countries, because Ukrainians began bombing and attacking the territory of old Russia with everything they have. Just yesterday we had the first videos of how the Ukrainians were attacking the territory of Russian Federation with ATACMS missiles, and as a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians managed to destroy at least one warehouse, and the Russians still haven't responded to those attacks. They are still preparing themselves before massive attack on the entire territory of Ukraine, and today we start receiving first updates that Ukrainians used the Storm Shadow missiles. And for example, let's take a look at this video. This video was published by the Russian sources, and in this video we can see how just a regular civilian from a small village by the name of Marina was filming, making the video, was recording the explosions and Storm Shadow attacks. So this is the end, or maybe this is the beginning of something new. Today we got reports that United Kingdom lifted any restrictions to attack deep inside of the territory of Russian Federation, and now we start, and right after United Kingdom lifted any restrictions, we start receiving updates about Storm Shadows. The sources later reported that there were up to 12 Storm Shadow missiles were launched at the region, and fragments of which are in the photo in the village of Marina. And this is the fragments. And this is the fragments that the source are talking about. There is some icon with the fragments. Anyway, and this is a huge escalation. Everybody understands this, and we see that the Western countries are entering this trip, this road for a reason. Furthermore, this morning we start receiving very weird and very interesting updates from the embassies of different countries that are currently located on the territory of Kyiv. The first ones were the embassy of the United States of America. The US embassy in Kyiv was warned of a powerful strike on Ukraine on November 20, that is today. The massive uranium raid on the northern regions of Ukraine last night is partly explained by the preparation for this strike. So as for the air defense reports, the Ukrainians indeed reported that the Russians used a significant number of drones. 122 drones were attacking the territory of Ukraine, and the Ukrainians managed to destroy just 56. And furthermore, the Russians used up to 5 Ha-59, Ha-69 aircraft missiles, and the Ukrainians are saying that they managed to bring down just 2. Later we got additional report from the different embassies. The US, Italian, Spanish and Greek embassies in Kyiv have announced the risk of an air attack and closed. The Americans were the first to announce their intention to close the embassy, and these countries were the next. Furthermore, after somewhere at noon time, a bit later, the Kazakhstan embassy also reported that they're going to close, and they asked their civilians on the territory of Ukraine to leave this country as fast as possible, and the safe way they can do this. And after all this mess, after this balagan with a significant number of reports about the Storm Shadows, about the explosions, about lifting restrictions, about embassies, we start receiving a lot of updates from the territory of Russia. And when talking about Russia, attention, there is information about the departure of a group of strategic bombers 295 MS from the airfield Alenia. The purpose of the departure is currently unknown, probably a redeployment of training, but later we start receiving updates that the Russians have concentrated up to 30 aircraft missile carriers that the Russians are planning to use this upcoming night. And some military experts reported that if the Russians are going to use 30 aircrafts this upcoming night, most likely tomorrow the Ukrainians will not see electricity at all, and for a very long period of time. Furthermore, the Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians have already moved 6 missile carriers in the Black Sea, a total salvo of 23 caliber missiles. So this upcoming night is going to be very difficult for Ukraine, and the most important question, whether the Ukrainians managed to prepare their air defense, because if they haven't managed to prepare, once again, most likely tomorrow the Ukrainians will not see electricity. And the most important update, that information is spreading online that Russian Federation is planning to launch a large-scale missile strike on the territory of Ukraine and use use a new ballistic missile. So the sources are saying that the Russians are going to use RS-26 Rubesh, is a Russian RK, which is called the derivative of the Yar's RS-24. The complex includes a self-propelled launcher and 3-stage ballistic missile with a flight range of from 2 till 6,000 kilometers, and the variation of the warhead, both nuclear and conventional, with the mass of about 1/1.2 tons. So most likely the Russians are going to use conventional warhead, and they're planning to show the Western countries, the NATO and the United States of America, what is going to be if the Western countries will continue the escalation. So very interesting situation. Furthermore, we have reported that a special Tu-214 aircraft airborne control center is currently operating over the Moscow region. So this is like real nuclear trainings, but without the use of nuclear weapon. Obviously, the Russians are going to attack this upcoming night the territory of Ukraine, but the purpose of the Russians is to stop the escalation and to show the Western countries there is no games anymore, and if you continue, then the situation is going to be very difficult. Furthermore, we have reports from the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service from the head of the Russian Foreign Intelligence. Attempts by NATO countries to participate in providing long-range strikes by Ukraine deep in Russia into Russia will not go unpunished. So this is the threat from a very, let's say, authorized person of Russian Federation. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, but obviously the situation is going to just escalate. And once again, the main purpose of the Western countries and Ukraine is to ruin the relations between the future president of the United States of America, between the elected president Donald Trump and Putin himself. The Western countries, Zelensky wants to create such a situation when the partnership and friendship between these two people is impossible due to the situation that is currently taking place on the territory of Ukraine. Putin can't leave the situation without answer. He can't do this because his people, Russians, the soldiers on the ground, are watching him and waiting from him a proper reaction. And most likely this proper reaction is going to come this upcoming night. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first we're going to talk about the Kursk direction. First of all, today we got report from the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation that the forces of the armored forces of Ukraine, which were blocked near Olgovsky forest, have been completely defeated. The Russians are saying that they managed to secure this territory. We don't know but the exact number of the prisoners of war that the Russians captured, but this foothold was eliminated and the cauldron was destroyed. So this is the situation. As you can see, we have colored this territory in Russian favor. Yesterday, different mappers adjusted their maps in Russian favor. We were keeping this territory as a contested area, and just today we have at least the reliable resource proof. We're talking about the Minister of Defense. As for the changes on the ground, the Russians resumed their attempts to move in the direction of Lebedevka and Sverdlikova. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians published a significant number of videos of how they were FPV droning the Ukrainian vehicles and tanks with a new type of drone. As you can see, this drone, this is the Russian drone that was attacking the Ukrainian forces, and I would like to point your attention on the quality of the video. This is new Russian drone with significant communication possibilities, and currently the Ukrainians don't have such a electronic warfare equipment that can suppress or to take control over this type of drone. So which means that one drone, one FPV drone operator, one target, and 100% accuracy, which of course improved the Russian positions on the ground significantly. Anyway, we can see the significant number of FPV drone attacks, which means that the Russians, after this cleanup operation, will begin offensive on the ground with the purpose to get as close as possible to the settlements of Sverdlikova and to the settlement of Lebedevka itself. Let's wait. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Sumy direction. Today the Russian sources published another video of how they managed to discover the temporary deployment point of the armored forces of Ukraine, and as a result of Iskander strike, the Russians destroyed this base. So since the beginning of this month, this is probably 10th or 12th geolocated attack by the Russians on Ukrainian concentration of forces. As you can see, the significant number of icons, and the Russians will continue doing this until they force the Ukrainians to fall back from the territory of the Kursk, and most likely this is going to happen very soon, because today we start receiving updates about the Ukrainian fortifications. The Ukrainians on the 20th of October started building the significant number of trenches, strongholds on the territory of Sumy region, along the border and inside of the Sumy area. So this is, as you can see, the Ukrainians are about to finish the layered defense in this direction, which of course the main purpose of this layered defense is to slow down the Russians as much as possible. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. Now let's talk about the northern Kupiansk direction. We have a lot of very interesting updates, and the most important updates are coming from Kolesnikovka. There was a very long operational pause in this area. Now we see that the Russians resumed their offensive. We have the significant changes on the ground. The Russians captured the forest and the railway station of Kolesnikovka, and this information was confirmed by the Ukrainian FPV drone attack on the Russian edge positions in this area. And the most important, that most of the mappers have already adjusted this territory in Russian favor several days ago, but just now we got the geolocation that confirmed this progress. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the southern Kupiansk direction. Something big is about to happen in this area. The Russians were preparing the final battle for the river of Zherebets for a very long period of time by getting closer and closer to the river itself. The Russians finished the preparation. Most likely during the next 24, 48 or 72 hours, the Russians will try to carry out the final attack in the direction of the village of Terny from the north, in the direction of Yampolovka from the southeast, with the purpose to defeat the Ukrainians completely and to clear this territory. Why is that? During the previous 24 hours, we got a lot of updates from the main supply roads that Ukrainians are using to support their forces in Tarskoye, Yampolovka, Zarechne. We are talking about these lines. This is the first road that Ukrainians are using to supply their forces along the line of combat contact, and this is the second road that Ukrainians are using to supply their forces in the southern Kupiansk direction. And during the previous 24 hours, the Russians destroyed both bridges in this area. For example, this is the video. This is the bridge, pontoon bridge, that was created by the Ukrainians. On this bridge, we can see vehicles that were heading towards the Ukrainian positions, but the Russians attacked and the bridge was destroyed. Later, we caught the picture, the video of the consequences of Russian attack. Of course, this pontoon bridge was destroyed, but obviously during the next 3, 4, 5 days, the Ukrainians will be able to repair it. But this is enough. This might be enough for the Russians the next 3, 4 days to conduct a counter-attack with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back from their edge positions. And this is another photo from the village of Tetianovka and Svetlogorsk. Another pontoon bridge was destroyed as a result of Russian attack. So logistic collapsed, and now the Russians have a window of opportunities for the next 3-4 days to defeat the Ukrainians in this area and to break through the Ukrainian defense belt. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Chasiv Yar direction, because as for this territory, we got a very interesting and very weird video that was published between the villages of Pritiechno and Stupochki. Let's take a look at this video. In this video, we can see the Ukrainian position, the Ukrainian FPV drone position. The Ukrainian operator took his drone and hid in the basement in the stronghold, and then we can see a Russian soldier that dropped mine inside of the stronghold, and then there was a very heavy explosion. And the thing is that some of the mappers managed to geolocate the stronghold exactly in this point. So we are not 100% sure that this event exactly took place there, but if this information is correct, if the geolocation is correct, then most likely the Russians, as a result of clashes during the previous several days, managed to establish complete control over the eastern part of the village of Pritiechno, and most likely over the village by the name of Stupochki, and most likely everything inside of this red line is already under complete Russian control. If this information is correct, then that means that the city of Chasiv Yar is about to be captured, and the Russians are and the distance between edge positions between the Russian and the distance between the edge positions of Russian force in Pritiechno and the city of Konstantinovka itself is already less than 5 kilometers, which is already a big catastrophe and disaster for the armed forces of Ukraine. Now let's talk about the city of Toretsk, where the Russians continue advancing. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly in the vicinity of mine by the name of Toretsk, and the Russians managed to improve their positions in the Zabalka district and to cut the district finally in two. This geolocation shows us how the Ukrainians were after withdrawing the edge Russian positions in this part of the Zabalka district. So we don't have more proofs to confirm that Zabalka was cut in two, and now the Russians will handle with every single direction separately. So we are entering the final stage of the battle for Toretsk. The Ukrainians have almost lost their main positions, and most likely during 2-3 weeks they would be forced to fall back, not earlier. Now let's talk about the Selidova direction. The Russians managed to improve their positions. We have the video of how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian forces in the southern part of Petrivka. According to different mappers, this village was already captured by the Russians maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, or during the previous 2 weeks or something like this. But just now we start receiving first updates of how the Russians were breaking through the Ukrainian defense in the vicinity of the cemetery, and how the Russians landed exactly in this area. The weather in this video tells me that most likely the video is fresh, not very old, and this episode took place exactly in this point, and now I have doubts whether the Russians indeed captured Petrivka, the positions along the railways. Maybe the mappers that colored this territory in Russian favor probably were too fast with making decisions about this direction. Most likely the northern and the northwestern part of the settlement still under Ukrainian control. Now let's talk about the northern Kurakhove direction, because we got very important video from the southern part of Solntsevka. This is very important video, and this video we can see how the Ukrainians were after withdrawing and attacking the Russian assault troopers, and one of the episodes of Ukrainian attacks took place exactly in the southern farms, which means that the Russians managed to cross the river of Salon and to capture the eastern part of the village completely. So this is the situation by the end of the 19th of November. This is the situation by the end of the 20th of November. The Russians control, according to the geolocations, around 50% of the settlement, and the most important, the Russians have their positions on the Ukrainian side of the river. So the distance between the Russian edge positions and the village of Stare Terny is less than 3 kilometers. So to cut and to create the first cauldron, the Russians need to move for another 3 kilometers, maybe less. They need just to move another 2 kilometers, and the main supply roads would be under complete fire control, and those Ukrainians that are currently located in these fields would be caught in cauldron and will have no chances for evacuation. Now their chances for safe evacuation is very close to zero, but then they're going to be at minimum level. Furthermore, we got reports that the Russians improved their positions in the southeastern part of Berestki. That was stated by pro-Ukraine mappers, and most likely this upcoming night, due to the situation in the south and Solntsevka, the Ukrainians most likely will withdraw their positions towards Stare Terny with the purpose to hold their lines and not to allow the Russians to cut the northern pincer of the Kurakhove cauldron on the line between Shevchenka and the village itself. Furthermore, we continue receiving updates from Kurakhove. Different sources reported that 35% of the town of Kurakhove is under Russian control now. As for the geolocations, we have the video from the most western part of the eastern Kurakhove. In this area, the Russians managed to capture farms and to raise the Russian flag. This video was geolocated, and this is exactly the place where the Russians raised their flag. Based on this video, we have adjusted another 10 or 20% or 30% of the eastern Kurakhove Russian favor. This territory used to be half under Ukrainian control, half in contested area. Now we have no doubts that the Russians control more than 60% of the eastern Kurakhove, and the clashes for the central are about to start. Now let's talk about the southern area. We got lots of very interesting updates from this territory, and the most important updates are coming from the village of Vilenka. Why is that? Today the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of active offensive actions, units of group of forces center captured and took under control the village of Ilinka. But when talking about the Kurakhove direction, there are two villages by the name of Ilinka. The first one is located to the north of Kurakhove, and the second one is located in the vicinity of Yelizavetka, next to Yelizavetovka. And first, most of the mappers colored this Ilinka in Russian control, but today we got very important statement that was published by the forces of the 79th Air Mobile Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, which are responsible for the settlements along the Sumy Yar river, and they stated that they were fighting for Ilinka till the last moment, but they were forced to fall back, and Ukrainians are saying that they were forced to fall back in the northwestern direction towards the village by the name of Romanovka. So the forces of 79th Brigade stated that they were fighting till the last moment for village Ilinka, but they were defeated, and they moved back, retreat towards the village of Romanovka in this direction. We don't know for sure who made the mistake, either the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation or the Ukrainian sources. So that's why we decided to color Ilinka in contested area, because we have lots of evidences, lots of updates that most likely the village was captured by the Russians. As for the changes on the ground and different mappers, the neutral mappers and pro-Ukrainian mappers and pro-Russian mappers reported that by the beginning of the 20th of November, the Russians managed to reach the outskirts of the village of Ilinka from the north, and today we got reports that the village was captured completely. Anyway, I believe that the southern Ilinka was captured, because from the southern part we also have another attack that was conducted by the Russians. The significant number of armored vehicles were storming the forest to the southwest of Elizavetovka, and the Russians managed to establish control over some part of the forest. When I'm talking about geolocations, as for different mappers of update, the Russians by the end of the 20th of November established control for over more than 50% of this forest. So I have no doubts that the Ukrainians sooner or later would retreat from these villages. Maybe they have already finished this process, and maybe the edge Ukraine positions are already located in the village of Ganovka, because there are very high risks that Ukrainians might be caught in cauldron, and the significant number of Ukrainians would become prisoners of war. So the situation is very difficult for the Ukrainians in this area, and the only solution for them is to retreat slowly, step by step, but to retreat further and further in the northwestern direction. Everything here would collapse, and Ukrainians most likely will not be able to hold their lines. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.